The great chamber of the Galactic Council glittered under its high dome, light reflecting from 1,000 floating crystals. Delegates from every corner of known space filled the curved rows, their voices blending into a chorus of strange tones, deep growls, metallic hums, and clicking languages. In the very center of it all, standing on the marble floor beneath the Council's seal, was Commander Raylan Pierce of Earth. He stood tall in his dark uniform, hands behind his back, eyes calm and steady. The humans had been invited here only recently. After years of proving themselves worthy to even sit in the same room as the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. But as Raylan scanned the faces around him, he knew this invitation was not respect, it was curiosity. They didn't take humans seriously. Not yet. A sharp, insect-like voice broke through the hum of the chamber. "And here we have the humans," said Vuric, a general from the Trath Dominion, his chitinous mouth clacking with amusement. "So small, so fragile. I hope they've brought their kitchen knives for the battle." The delegates around him chuckled, some softly, some loud and mocking. Another alien, tall and serpent-bodied, swayed in laughter. "Perhaps they can distract the enemy with their charming primitive songs," he hissed. Laughter echoed across the chamber, bouncing off the crystal walls. Raylan's jaw tightened, but his face betrayed nothing. He had been warned about this, that in the Council's eyes, humanity was an infant species. It's barely out of its cradle. The Council session had been called to discuss one thing: the return of the Ravagers. These were not ordinary raiders or pirates. They were an ancient force, a race of warlords who had burned worlds centuries ago before vanishing into the dark beyond the galactic rim. Reports had come in over the past month. Planets destroyed in hours, fleets shattered without survivors. Even the strongest militaries had fallen quickly. Yet here in the chamber, arrogance and pride still clouded the air. The Council believed that united, they could defeat the Ravagers easily. The humans, in their view, were just extra bodies for the front line. High Chancellor Sorth, a massive being of stone and molten veins, struck the Council gavel. "Let us hear from our human representative," he rumbled. Gosh, though his tone carried the weight of expectation, not of wisdom, but of entertainment. Raylan stepped forward. He looked around the chamber, letting the silence grow. He laughed. He said, his voice steady, "You mock. But the enemy you are facing doesn't care if you think we are small. They don't care about your fleets or your centuries of war. They only care about wiping you from existence." The words hung in the air, the quiet only broken by a few low growls and snorts of disbelief. Varric leaned forward, clicking in amusement. "And what will you do, human? Throw rocks?" The laughter came again, rolling through the rows like a wave. Raylan said nothing. Instead, he simply tapped the device in his hand. A hologram burst into the air above him, the wreckage of an alien dreadnought, its hull still burning in the void, shattered into pieces by precise strikes. That, Raylan said quietly, was the lead ship of the Graal Armada, destroyed in 14 minutes by a single human vessel.
Ow.
The laughter stopped. For a moment, the silence was sharp enough to cut. The delegates exchanged glances, some frowning, some suddenly curious. Before the tension could settle, a side door slid open, and a council aide rushed in, whispering urgently into the Chancellor's ear. The molten veins in Sorth's body flared brighter. "The Ravagers have attacked Calrose Prime," he announced. "The 5th and 7th fleets are already en route." A ripple of voices spread through the chamber, urgent and tense. Raylan caught a glance from Koresh, the quiet, silver-eyed representative of the Valari, one of the few who had not joined in the laughter earlier. There was something knowing in his gaze, as though he had been waiting for this moment. The session broke into chaos, each species shouting orders to their fleets, some demanding more ships, others calling for evacuations. Raylan turned to leave. But a small, discreet device in his pocket buzzed. He slipped into a quiet corridor, pressed the communicator to his ear, and heard the voice of Earth's fleet command. "Commander, authorization confirmed. Deploy the fleet. Show them what humanity can do." Raylan stood in the shadows for a moment, a slow, cold smile forming. Outside in the Grand Chamber, the aliens were still shouting over each other, still arguing about pride and strategy. They didn't know. They couldn't imagine. The humans had been quiet long enough. Now, in the silence between the councils, mockery and the coming war, Raylan could already see the moment when the laughter would stop, and when it did. The galaxy would never forget. The council's chamber was still buzzing when Commander Raylan Pierce left it behind. The long corridors of the central spire felt quieter than usual. He could still hear muffled voices echoing down the halls, panic mixed with disbelief. Most of the delegates thought the attack on Calrose Prime was just another border skirmish. They didn't understand what the word Ravagers really meant. Raylan did. He had seen the files Earth's intelligence service had pieced together old war records, fragmentary reports, and the kind of battlefield photographs that stayed burned into the mind. This wasn't going to be a war of territory. This was going to be a war of survival. A lift carried him up to the roof platform where his personal transport waited, engines glowing in the dusk light of the alien city. Above the skyline, the stars were beginning to appear, sharp and cold against the endless black. Raylan stepped aboard, gave the pilot a silent nod, and within seconds, they were cutting through the atmosphere toward the orbital docks. The moment they cleared the city's gravity well, the view shifted, hundreds of ships moving in ordered formations, their drive trails streaking against the darkness. But none of those ships belonged to Earth. The humans had kept their fleet away from Council space, hidden in remote sectors, far from alien eyes. That secrecy had been deliberate. The Cums terminal lit up, and Admiral Sloane's face appeared, stern and battle-worn. Pierce, it's confirmed. The Ravagers hit Calrose Prime with 3 war carriers. Their planetary shields held for just under an hour. Surface cities are gone. Her voice didn't waver, but Raylan could see the shadow in her eyes. Moving in, the Dauntless Gravewind and Iron Rain will form the first spearhead. The rest of the fleet will follow. Leaned forward. The Council fleets? Sloane gave a small, humorless smile. They're charging in blind. No coordination. They still think numbers will save them. She shook her head. By the time they realize the Ravagers don't fight by their rules, it'll be too late. Yes. His transport cut across the orbital lanes. Raylan's thoughts kept drifting back to the chamber, the laughter, the mockery. They thought humans were fragile, too new to the galaxy to matter. That was fine. Let them think that, because the first time humanity revealed its war fleet in full would be the moment the galaxy's image of them shattered. Minutes later, transport docked at a sleek black warship that dwarfed the Council vessels nearby. The Vanguard. Its hull was angular and unpolished, built for function over beauty. Heavy gun batteries lined both flanks, and the launch bays along its belly were already alive with activity. Raylan stepped onto the command deck, where the crew snapped to attention. The air here was different, sharp, purposeful. No arrogance. No politics. Just soldiers ready for war. Status, Raylan ordered. Fleet on standby, reported Lieutenant Arya, her hands dancing over the tactical console. Coordinates for Calrose Prime locked. Stealth systems engaged until you give the word. Raylan studied the holomap in the center of the room. Calrose Prime was glowing red, surrounded by shifting enemy icons. The Ravagers moved like a tide. Fast and precise, their smaller craft picking apart the Council's larger warships. The aliens were already losing ships at an alarming rate. "Patch me into the Dauntless," Raylan said. A moment later, Captain Harker's voice filled the deck. "Commander, we've been holding position, waiting for your signal. The moment you give it, we'll hit them hard." Raylan's eyes never left the map. Not yet. What? Let them think they're winning. He could feel the weight of the decision, but also the thrill of the coming strike. The Council fleets were breaking apart, their formations collapsing. Ravagers, confident in their victory, were closing in for the kill. That was when the humans would move. The countdown began in his head. 5 minutes, 4, 3. Every tick of the clock brought them closer to the point, where shock would hit harder than any weapon. Finally, Raylan gave the order. All ships drop stealth, weapons free. Hit them like the fist of God. The darkness beyond Calrose Prime. A new light bloomed. Dozens of human warships tearing out of stealth, their guns already firing. Rail slugs the size of shuttles punched through Ravager carriers. Missile salvos arced across the void, detonating in blinding white bursts. The Vanguard's forward cannons roared, shredding enemy escorts before they could react. On the Council, com channels, the voices shifted from confusion to stunned silence. Delegates and fleet commanders who had laughed at humans only hours earlier were now watching the impossible, the Ravagers, pulling back under the sheer force of a human assault. And this was only the first strike. The smile the galaxy had worn was gone. What came next would wipe away whatever was left of their doubts. The battle over Calrose Prime was chaos, but to Raylan Pierce, it was the kind of chaos humans thrived in. Council fleets were still scattered, trying to regroup after suffering heavy losses. Their formations were broken, their commanders scrambling to issue new orders while under relentless fire. The Ravagers pressed their advantage, swarming over crippled ships, tearing through weakened shields, and bombarding what remained of the planet below. But then, the human fleet cut into the fight. Like a blade. It wasn't just their firepower, it was how they moved. The Vanguard, Dauntless, and Iron Rain led the charge, weaving through enemy lines with impossible precision. Instead of holding rigid formations, the human ships danced across the battlefield, shifting targets on instinct, adapting in seconds. To every change, the Ravagers, who were used to overwhelming foes through brute force and sheer speed, suddenly found themselves on the defensive. Raylan stood on the Vanguard's command deck, eyes locked on the holomap. Enemy icons flickered and vanished as human salvos landed one after another. "Target the carrier groups," he ordered. Cut their coordination, and the rest will scatter." The Vanguard's main batteries lit up the void, hammering the largest Ravager war carrier in sight. The ship's shields buckled under the onslaught, and moments later, a rail slug smashed through its central hull, splitting it in two. A wave of human fighters streamed past, diving into the gap to tear apart the vessel's reactors. The resulting explosion sent fragments spinning into the dark. And for the first time since the battle began, the Ravager formations faltered across the coms. The voices of Council commanders came through, disbelief laced with a grudging, "Respect your ships. They're moving like nothing I've ever seen." "How are you doing this?" one asked. Raylan didn't bother answering. It wasn't something they would understand. Human tactics weren't based on the Council's centuries-old doctrines. They were born from desperate wars fought on 1,000 different battlefields against enemies who never played fair. The Ravagers tried to adapt, breaking into smaller assault wings to outflank the humans. But every time they shifted, the human fleet shifted faster. It was like watching predators hunt, coordinated without needing orders, every ship anticipating the other's moves. In one brutal exchange, the Gravewind lured a cluster of enemy destroyers into a tight pursuit, only for the Dauntless to sweep in from above, unleashing a broadside that ripped them apart in seconds. "Status on the planet?" Raylan asked. His tone clipped. Lieutenant Arya's fingers danced across her console. "Multiple cities lost. Evacuation ships are lifting off now, but they're under fire. If we don't clear the lower orbit soon, they won't make it." Raylan's jaw tightened. "Then we make them." The Vanguard dove hard toward the planet, its engines screaming against the pull of gravity. Human frigates followed, peeling off to shield the evacuation craft. The airspace above Calrose Prime became a storm of tracer fire, missile streaks, and explosions that painted the night sky. From the ground, survivors would see flashes brighter than any sunrise, each one marking the fall of an enemy ship. The Ravagers didn't retreat easily. Even as their losses mounted, they threw everything they had into stopping the humans. One enemy cruiser locked onto the Vanguard, pouring energy fire into its forward shields. The impact rattled the entire hull, alarms blaring across the deck. "Shields." "Holding at 60%, Arya called out. Raylan's voice was steady. "Fire the spinal gun." The Vanguard's central cannon, a weapon so massive it ran the length of the ship, unleashed a single shot. A white-hot beam lanced across the wall. void, piercing the Ravager cruisers straight through. The enemy ship didn't explode, it simply came apart, breaking into molten fragments that tumbled into the atmosphere. Within minutes, the lower orbit was cleared. Evacuation ships began streaming toward the safety of the human fleet engines, burning bright. The Council ships, once scattered, now rallied behind the humans, following their lead without question. On the Vanguard's deck, Raylan allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. The battle wasn't over, far from it. The Ravagers were already regrouping at the edge of the system, no doubt preparing for a second assault. But something had changed. The Council fleets had seen the truth. The Ravagers had felt it. Humanity wasn't the fragile, naive newcomer they had laughed at. In the dark of space, under the roar of war, the galaxy had just witnessed the first sign of what humans could truly do. And Raylan knew the next fight would be even bloodier. The wreckage from the first battle still drifted above Calrose Prime. When the long-range sensors screamed to life, the second wave was coming. Larger, heavier, and far more dangerous than the first. Raylan Pierce stood over the holomap, watching the new signatures flood in. Dozens of Ravager warships, carriers, dreadnoughts, assault barges, all converging on their position. They weren't rushing blindly this time. They were moving in perfect formation, shields locked together, weapons primed in a wall of firepower that could crush anything in its path. They've adapted. Lieutenant Arya muttered. They learned from the last fight. Raylan's eyes narrowed. Good. That means they're taking us seriously. But deep down he knew what this meant. The first wave had been a test, a probing strike to gauge the human strength. Now the Ravagers were coming to end the fight. Across the Coms Council commanders were already panicking. We can't hold against that force. Our fleets are still damaged. We must retreat to the outer colonies. Raylan didn't even glance at them. Retreat, and the planet's gone. The evac ships won't make it. We hold here, or the system dies. His voice carried no room for argument. The human fleet moved fast, pushing out to meet the incoming armada before it reached the planet. The Vanguard led the center line, flanked by the Dauntless and Iron Rain. While lighter frigates darted between them like wolves circling prey, the strategy was risky. Hit the Ravagers before they could unleash their full firepower, forcing them into a brawl instead of a siege. When the fleets clashed, space lit up like a sun-going supernova. Energy beams, missile trails, and railgun. Slugs cut through the void in every direction. The soundless violence was overwhelming. The kind of battle where a single mistake meant instant death. The Ravagers pressed forward with terrifying discipline. Their dreadnoughts absorbed punishment that would have shredded Council ships, while their fighter swarms tore into the flanks of anything not moving fast enough. But the humans didn't fight like the Council. They didn't cling to rigid lines, or wait for perfect orders. They broke formation, darted through gaps, and attacked from angles the Ravagers never saw coming. One moment a human frigate seemed cornered, the next it was slipping under an enemy's shields and unloading point blank. On the Vanguard, Raylan's voice was calm but relentless. Shift fire to their right flank. Force them to pivot. Now swing the frigates through their middle. Make them split. It worked briefly. The Ravager's wall of ships began to fracture as they scrambled to respond. But for every gap the humans created, the enemy filled it with more firepower. A plasma barrage slammed into the Dauntless, tearing through its side armor and venting flame into space. Dauntless is crippled, came the report. Not yet, Raylan growled. Cover. Her retreat. Push everything we have on the lead dreadnought. The Vanguard's railguns roared, hammering the massive enemy ship over and over until its shields collapsed. Moments later, a missile spread from the Iron Rain ripped through its hull, detonating its core in a blinding flash. The shockwave tore several smaller Ravager ships apart, briefly halting their advance. But the second wave wasn't breaking. If anything, the destruction only made them angrier. Their surviving dreadnoughts surged forward, weapons blazing. The Vanguard's shields began to buckle under the onslaught. They're trying to crush our center, Arya warned. Then, we stopped being the center, Raylan said, in a move that defied every Council tactic. Raylan ordered the entire human formation to scatter, ships peeling off in every direction. The Ravagers pushed forward to fill the gap, only to find themselves surrounded on all sides. Suddenly, the hunters were the hunted, trapped in a kill. The zone where every human ship had a clean firing angle. One by one, the enemy ships began to fall. Not because the humans had more guns, but because they were unpredictable. Wild in a way the Ravagers couldn't counter. By the time the last dreadnought exploded, the battlefield was littered with wreckage. Second wave was gone, but Raylan knew there would be a third. Next time the Ravagers wouldn't just adapt, they'd come for blood. The third wave didn't come immediately. For a full day, the void above Calrose Prime was silent, except for the faint drift of wreckage. Human and council ships worked frantically to repair what they could, hauling damaged vessels into formation and patching holes with whatever materials were left. But that silence felt wrong. Too still, too deliberate. Raylan Pierce had been in enough wars to know the enemy wasn't retreating. They were preparing. The council commanders mistook the pause for victory. Around the tactical table, their voices were full of self-congratulation. We've driven them off for now. Perhaps they've realized the cost of fighting us. Human tactics have proven unexpectedly effective. Raylan didn't share their optimism, kept his gaze on the long-range scans. They're not gone. They're regrouping. And when they return, it won't be like before. When the readings finally came in, his warning proved true. The Ravagers weren't sending a wave this time. They were bringing their full war armada. Hundreds of ships. A wall of death that stretched across the scanner grid. Like a shadow blotting out the stars, panic swept through the council ships. "This is impossible," one captain cried. "They'll overwhelm us in minutes." "Not if we hit them before." "They hit us," Raylan said. His voice was flat, steady, the voice of someone who had already accepted the cost of what was coming. The plan he laid out was insane by council standards. Instead of holding position and defending the planet, the human fleet would charge into the heart of the incoming formation, using speed and chaos to shatter their coordination before it could lock in. The council officers were horrified, but the human captains didn't hesitate. When the battle began, it was like nothing the Ravagers had faced. The humans didn't meet the armada head-on. They slipped through it, weaving between capital ships and tearing at supply cruisers, communications, relays, and command vessels. Entire chunks of the enemy fleet went blind, their formations collapsing as their leaders vanished in bursts of fire. But the price was brutal. The Dauntless, still limping from the last fight, took a direct hit to its reactor and vanished in a sphere of light. The Iron Rain lost half its crew, repelling a boarding assault before ramming an enemy battleship to break the encirclement. On the Vanguard, alarms screamed non-stop. The shields were nearly gone, hull breaches spreading, weapon banks overheating. Arya slammed her fist on the console. "We can't keep this up." "Yes, we can," Raylan said. His eyes locked on the largest signature in the Ravager fleet, a colossal dreadnought that dwarfed even the Vanguard. It wasn't just a flagship. It was the heart of their command network. Destroy it, and the entire armada would fracture. Humans tore their way toward it, every surviving ship in the fleet converging on the dreadnought. Ravager escorts tried to block them, but desperation made the humans faster, sharper. Frigates sacrificed themselves to clear paths. Cruisers fired until their barrels melted, and fighters dove headlong into enemy swarms. When the Vanguard finally reached firing range, Raylan didn't hesitate. All batteries now. The barrage lit the void, slamming into the dreadnought's shields until they shattered like glass. Missiles followed, ripping into its hull, each explosion tearing it further apart. The Ravager flagship groaned, split, and then detonated in a firestorm that shook the battlefield. For a moment, there was silence. Then chaos. Without their command ship, the Ravager fleet lost its discipline. Ships scattered, some trying to regroup, others fleeing outright. The humans had done it. They had broken the armada, but as the wreckage drifted and the wounded limped back to Calrose Prime, Raylan knew the truth. They hadn't won. The enemy wasn't beaten. This was only the moment before the real storm. The smoke of battle still lingered in the skies above Calrose Prime, hanging like a shroud over the battered fleets. Wreckage drifted in slow, silent arcs across the void, some pieces still glowing faintly from recent explosions. On the planet's surface, crowds gathered to watch the crippled ships descend for repairs. Their hulls scarred and blackened, to the Council, the fight had been a desperate but glorious victory. In the great chamber, speeches rang out, filled with talk of unity and resilience. Holoscreens displayed images of human and alien crews standing side by side, battered but proud. Some even dared to say the war might soon be over. Raylan Pierce didn't share the celebration. He stood at the edge of the chamber, hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the tactical feeds scrolling quietly along his wrist display. There were signs no one else wanted to see, fragments of encrypted signals still active in the void, strange energy readings from deep space, and, most troubling of all, reports from human scouts about abandoned enemy outposts filled with nothing but silence. That silence wasn't peace. It was preparation. In the hangar of the Vanguard, Arya was overseeing emergency repairs when a sealed data packet arrived from Earth's military command. It wasn't routed through Council channels. When she decrypted it, her breath caught. It was a warning, intercepted intelligence from the far edges of explored space. The Ravagers had called in something new. Something the reports only described in 3 words: the Black Sun. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a fleet. No one was certain what it was. But wherever it appeared, entire systems vanished from all records, their star maps wiped clean, their coordinates erased. That night, Raylan called an emergency meeting, only human captains. In a dark conference room deep within the Vanguard, the faces around the table were tired, grim, and determined. "They're coming back," Raylan said simply. "And next time they won't just bring numbers, they'll bring something built to end this war in one strike." Some captains wanted to fortify Calrose Prime and hold the line. Others argued for taking the fight to the enemy before the Black Sun arrived. But Raylan had another idea, one the Council would never approve. He proposed slipping past the front lines entirely and striking deep into Ravager territory, hunting the Black Sun before it could reach inhabited space. It was reckless. It was near suicidal. But if it worked, they might end the threat before it began. The Council, of course, would refuse such a plan. They would demand proof, they would demand debate, and by the time the talking ended, it would be too late. That left the humans with only one option: go without permission. Over the next days, preparations began in secret. Ships were quietly resupplied under the guise of long-range reconnaissance missions. Weapon systems were modified for maximum firepower at close range. And in hidden workshops aboard the Vanguard, engineers were assembling something untested, a device designed to overload enemy reactors in seconds. Arya looked out from the viewing deck as the human fleet formed up in the shadows of Calrose Prime's outer moons. "We're going to war," she said softly. Raylan stood beside her, eyes hard. "No," he replied. "We're going to end one." But far beyond their sensors, in the uncharted black, the Black Sun was already moving. And it had seen them coming.